that it would be the new platform for home movies that blew up the year she released her first book. She couldn't have. She wrote about the world that she currently lived in, and that world was years behind 1997. And obviously she had to carry through with this for the rest of the series, because you can't just skip a few years in between two books to catch up to modern day. And this is why the Battle of Hogwarts and the series ended in 1998, and then 19 years later clearly had to take place 19 years after 1998, not after 2007. So according to the actual timeline, Epilogue took place in 2019, whereas many fans would just go off of the book's release date, thinking the Epilogue took place in 2026. 1991 is the year that everything is based around, whether it be in the past or the future. The dates and birthdays of Voldemort, Dumbledore, Grindelwald, the year that Harry lost his parents, the year that he went to Hogwarts, the years that the first Wizarding War took place in, all are based around that 1991 year, and that is why the series took place in the 90s, not the 2000s. I just wanted to make this video because I've seen so many people very confused in my comment section, especially when talking about the deaths of characters, most of which lost their lives in the Battle of Hogwarts, which as I said took place in 1998. I hope this clears himself up for those confused, and I hope you learned a little something about the series in general, or even some stuff about J.K. Rowling and the making of the series. Thank you so much for watching, guys. You can go and just get The 7 Harry Potter books follow the second Wizarding War, but what about the first Wizarding War? It actually has a very complicated timeline because it was a lot longer than the second one. In this video, I'm going to break that timeline down and explain each and every step of this war. Before we start, I'm trying to grow my footprint on other social medias besides just YouTube, so it would be awesome if you guys could follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I tweet about your favorite fandoms like Harry Potter, Avatar, Star Wars, Marvel, Hunger Games, and so much more. And you can see behind the scenes movie flame stuff on Instagram, and just some of my personal life like my dog Loki, who is the cutest dog in the world, and just some fun posts on both platforms. All of my social media platforms as well as my Patreon are linked below for easy access. If you want, give me a follow. If not, that's totally fine. So now, let's get the video started. So first off, let's just get this out of the way. Grindelwald was not part of the First Wizarding War. He started his own campaign in Europe to collect the Deathly Hallows and expose wizards to muggles, his goal being to have the wizards rule over the muggles. All of this was something separate, and is referred to as the Global Wizarding War, which is what the Fantastic Beasts films are focusing on, and that started all the way back in 1910 and went on until 1945. I'll explain how that war intertwines with the First Wizarding War as we go though. The First Wizarding War's roots begin with Tom Riddle, aka Lord Voldemort, who was the key to everything. He was born in 1926, but let's fast forward to his time at Hogwarts. Tom went to Hogwarts in 1938, and by his second year in 1939, Tom put together a group of Slytherin students who were a mixture of the weak seeking protection, the ambitious seeking glory, and the thuggish who were seeking a leader who could show them fine cruelty. The members of this gang, who were all of wealthy pureblood families, were involved in a number of nasty incidents during their school years, though Tom was careful to never be associated in any wrongdoings, and he was seen as a model student, first becoming a prefect during his 5th year in 1942, and then in 1944 in his 7th year, he became head boy. Dumbledore seemed to be the only person that saw through Tom's manipulative charm, and he kept a close eye on him. And keep their relationship in mind, because their relationship is a key factor in this war. During Riddle's time at school, he took on the name of Lord Voldemort, though only those closest to him knew about this name change. Meanwhile, all of his Slytherin gang took on the name the Knights of Walpurgis. While in school, Voldemort saw Dumbledore's true power during his final year at Hogwarts in 1945, when Dumbledore finally went into action to help stop the Global Wizarding War, and he dueled and took down Grindelwald. He locked Grindelwald in his own prison, and the Global Wizarding War was finally over. This brought peace to the Wizarding world for years to come, though Voldemort knew that this would not last long with the plans he had in mind. Dumbledore had acquired the Elder Wand after beating its previous master and his ex-friend in a duel to win its allegiance, though fighting Grindelwald was not easy for him, as he had a very passionate and complicated past with Grindelwald. This is the clear line where the Global Wizarding War intertwines with the First Wizarding War, and as we know, all of this will later connect to the Second Wizarding War as well, when Voldemort went after the Elder Wand and crossed paths with Grindelwald in 1998. Going back to 1943 though, Voldemort made Horcruxes in his final few years at Hogwarts, and after graduating in 1945, Voldemort began to collect more items to make more Horcruxes, and he did this from 1945 all the way to 1971, first using what the Grey Lady told him to find Ravenclaw's diadem in Albania, and he did that from 1945 to 1949. Then he pursued more objects through his job at Borgin and Burke's, which he got around 1950. And here, with this job, he charmed a lady named Hepzibah Smith for a good 11 years, until finally killing her in 1961. He took her most prized possessions for his Horcruxes, and he framed her house elf for the murder. After that, Voldemort disappeared for 10 years, from 1961 to 1971. Rewinding to 1959, Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew were born, and a few months later in 1960, James Potter, Remus Lupin, Lily Evans, and Severus Snape were all born as well, and later on in their lives, they would play a huge part in the First Wizarding War. There was a lot going on while Voldemort went missing for those 10 years that led to the war. Navi Leech became the Minister of Magic in 1962, and he was the first Muggle-born minister, and his appointment caused a lot of uproar, especially from the older and pure-blood ministry workers, many of whom resigned in protest, something that divided the ministry and weakened it quite a bit. Leech left office in 1968 after getting a mysterious illness, and Abraxas Malfoy, Draco Malfoy's grandfather, was believed to have poisoned him in protest of his Muggle-born status, and Leech died shortly after that. Having this corruption and the stuff going on behind the scenes weakened the ministry even more, making it even easier for Voldemort to swoop in and take advantage of this chaos when he returned. During the time where it seemed as though Voldemort had fallen off the face of the earth from 1961 to 1971, he explored the dark arts extensively, studying the most obscure and rare branches of magic. He also interacted with many dark wizards that he realized were very loyal to him. Voldemort would go on to combine the Knights of Walpurgis from his Hogwarts days, and combine them with the dark wizards he met during his time away, and they would drop the name the Knights of Walpurgis, and would all don the same title of Death Eaters, forming one large group of Voldemort's followers. As soon as Voldemort came out of hiding in 1971, 10 years after killing Hepzibah Smith, he had now officially dropped the name Tom Riddle and was Lord Voldemort to everybody, not just his followers. Though almost everyone in the Wizarding world would become so terrified of him that they refused to say his name, calling him He Who Must Not Be Named or You-Know-Who instead. The first thing Voldemort did after returning was ask Dumbledore for a job as Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts, his hope being to use this job to recruit an army of students, but Dumbledore refused to give him the job. The First Wizarding War officially began around 1971. He told his Death Eaters that to truly create a world of peace and power, the old regime needed to be torn down at any and all costs, and only those who shared pure blood and the same idealism as himself would be allowed to live and thrive in this new world. In truth, however, Voldemort had little interest in political idealism. He was completely devoted to amassing his own magical power, and in becoming the most powerful and skilled wizard to have ever lived. In 1971, the same year that Voldemort returned and the First Wizarding War started, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, Peter Pettigrew, Severus Snape, and Lily Evans all started their first year at Hogwarts. Snape quickly became friends with Slytherin students who were into dark magic and who worshipped the new tyrant, Lord Voldemort. James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter all became really good friends, and they were Snape's enemy. James and Sirius bullied Snape a lot, and Snape returned the favor, but James and Sirius were normally the ones that came out laughing, something that would carve their futures and future decisions that would play a big part in the First Wizarding War, though they had no idea of this at the time. After being denied the Defense Against the Dark Arts job, Voldemort realized he had to recruit an army in a different way. So from 1971 to 1973, he recruited many of the beings and creatures that had been outcasted by the normal Wizarding world, such as giants, werewolves, a good number of Dementors, but not all of them, and Acromantula, just to name a few. His army of shunned beings, along with his Death Eaters, caused widespread destruction and mayhem. Incidents that made up the early years of the war in the early 70s. Seeing Voldemort's army grow, Dumbledore realized that he needed an army of his own, and he too formed an army in the early 1970s. Dumbledore had to keep this under who were actually Molly Weasley's brothers. There were also several others, most of whom had come across Dumbledore sometime in their life, and they all respected and trusted him with their lives, hence why they joined up with him. Because the actual Ministers of Magic weren't doing a great job during this time, it made Voldemort's quest much easier. Eugenia Jenkins was the minister when Voldemort first returned in 1971, but before that, in 1968, she had to deal with Squib riots, which only made the gap between pureblood supremacists and those with less pure blood even worse, as the two sides of the Wizarding world tore one another up. Jenkins then had to deal with Voldemort returning in 1971, when the world and Ministry was already in chaos, and after about 4 years of trying to combat the Dark Lord, she was seen as incapable of meeting the challenge that Voldemort posed, and she was kicked out of office in 1975. She was then replaced by Minister Harold Mincham, and he pushed back hard against Voldemort. During his time in office, however, there were many protests, as various minority groups demanded to be treated equally, but this led to many of the old elite pureblood families feel as though their way of life was being threatened. This led to many pureblood supremacists who did not join the ranks of the Death Eaters give their wholehearted support to Voldemort's cause. In 1976, Lily Evans, who was friends with Snape, tried to put a stop to James and Sirius bullying him, but Snape called her a mudblood, effectively ending their friendship, and something that sent Snape down an even darker path than before. At the end of their Hogwarts career in 1978, pretty much all Snape's friends were soon to be Death Eaters, and meanwhile, James and Lily became close and started dating. After graduating in 1978, James, Sirius, Lupin, Peter, and Lily all joined the Order of the Phoenix, and meanwhile, Snape joined Voldemort and became a Death Eater. The war was brutal, and the Order had to work hard, as they were outnumbered by a ratio of 20 to 1 by the Death Eaters. Fabian and Gideon Pruitt were murdered by a group of 5 Death Eaters. There were several Order members that disappeared. Families of Order members became targets, and it seemed as though the Order members were dropping like flies. Nevertheless, they kept fighting, and during this, James and Lily Potter, who had just gotten married, along with Alice and Frank Longbottom, all defied Voldemort himself 3 times, something that would play a part in the prophecy, which I'll get to in a bit. One thing that made Voldemort and his Death Eaters even more terrifying was the Dark Mark, which they would shoot up in the sky over a murder scene, paralyzing those who see it with fear. People would come home to find the Dark Mark over their house, and would find their whole family dead inside. Voldemort also put this Dark Mark on the arms of all of his Death Eaters, and he used this to call them to him. The Dark Lord also went on to kill innocent homeless muggles, and he reanimated their bodies using dark magic, creating an army of Inferi, on top of all of the other followers and creatures that he already had on his side. With his army of dark wizards and dark creatures at his command, Voldemort launched an assault against the British Ministry of Magic with the intention of toppling it and creating a new world order run by purebloods, with Muggleborns either killed or kept alive in a torturous way. To achieve these ends, the Death Eaters and their allies began openly carrying out attacks on Muggles for sport and to spread chaos. Cleaning up these attacks, healing survivors, modifying memories, searching for the predators, and attempting to prevent future attacks occupied more and more of the Ministry's time and attention. As their confidence grew, the Death Eaters expanded their targets from just under the Dark Lord's control. This was not the case for everyone, however. Under the leadership of Dumbledore, Hogwarts remained completely and totally untouched by Voldemort and his Death Eaters. One big reason for this was that Voldemort feared Dumbledore and did not dare go near his school. One day when James and Sirius were on a mission for the Order, they were speeding down the road in Sirius's famous motorbike as Death Eaters were pursuing them on broomsticks. While speeding down the road, however, Muggle police saw them and tried to go after them for speeding. James and Sirius were forced to turn down an alley where the Muggle cops thought they had them, but when the Death Eaters flew down toward the alley, James and Sirius used magic to lift the cop car in the air, forcing the Death Eaters to crash into it, and James and Sirius left the stunned Muggle police. The current Minister of Magic, Harold Mincham, did a good job pushing back against Voldemort and his Death Eaters, even placing more Dementors around Azkaban. But ultimately, he was unable to contain what looked like Voldemort's unstoppable rise to power. Mincham was replaced, but this did not change much. Voldemort got stronger and stronger, and the Order of the Phoenix just wasn't able to contain his growing presence. Things got much worse for the Order, as Voldemort and his Death Eaters were killing Order members and their families left and right, leading to over 10 deaths in just 1 week. Because of this, Barty Crouch Sr. took on the task of trying to take Voldemort and his Death Eaters down through the Ministry of Magic instead of the Order. Crouch made a law that said Aurors could now use the 3 unforgivable curses on Death Eaters without warning. This led to Aurors Mad-Eye, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and Alice and Frank Longbottom go on a massive campaign. They initially focused their efforts on resisting the giants, killing many of them with the Killing Curse, and wiping out entire tribes until they forced the surviving giants to go into hiding in Britain. Finally, the Ministry began to identify and apprehend Death Eaters. Mad-Eye became legendary for his successes, arresting and capturing Igor Karkaroff along with many other supporters of the Dark Lord. But it came at the price of his body, losing his leg, having too many scars to count, and even having a chunk of his nose missing. And it wasn't just Mad-Eye that was doing well. The Magical Law Enforcement Squad captured many more Death Eaters, and they were all sent to Azkaban, many without a trial because of Barty Crouch Sr. However, Voldemort himself still remained untouchable, both for his elusiveness and for his legendary power and skill, which no one but Dumbledore could match. In July 1980, James and Lily had a baby boy who they named Harry, and Alice and Frank Longbottom had a baby boy who they named Neville. In August of 1981, Snape overheard Dumbledore's interview with Sybil Trelawney, and during this interview, Trelawney foretold a prophecy that had to do with Voldemort and a baby boy. Snape, however, did not hear the whole prophecy, but he told his master about it, because according to what he had heard, this boy was Voldemort's greatest threat. It could have been about Harry or Neville, but Voldemort not hearing the whole prophecy went after Harry, which actually set the prophecy in stone. Snape, realizing that Voldemort was going after Lily and her family, however, he turned on his master and went to Dumbledore, begging him to hide Lily, James, and Harry, and Dumbledore agreed. In September of 1981, Dumbledore offered to James and Lily to be their secret keeper, meaning only himself and whoever Dumbledore chose to tell could find the Potters, and no one else even stood a chance. However, James and Lily chose Sirius to be their secret keeper, but later switched it to their friend Peter Pettigrew in secret, because it was clear that there was a rat in the group, and they wanted to throw the rat off. But they were all wrong, as Pettigrew was the one feeding Voldemort information. The rat that he was, he betrayed Lily and James, and he went straight to Voldemort to tell him exactly where the Potters were. On October 31st, 1981, Voldemort went to the Potters, killed James, and went to find the baby boy that threatened his whole existence. However, when he got to Harry's crib, Lily jumped in front of her only son to protect him, and unknown to Voldemort, her sacrifice put a protection on Harry through the power of love. When Voldemort used the Killing Curse on the boy, the love protection made the spell rebound and hit Voldemort instead. Voldemort would have died right then and there, but because he had his Horcruxes, he lived, but in the most feeble way. He was forced to flee, and he did not have enough strength to make it back to civilization. Almost everybody in the Wizarding World thought that Voldemort had died, effectively ending the First Wizarding War, their hero a mere one-year-old child who would be dubbed the Boy Who Lived. That same night, news of Voldemort's downfall and apparent death spread like wildfire throughout all of Great Britain. There were monumental celebrations breaking out all across the country, and the celebrations were so big that numerous large-scale breaches of the International Statute of Secrecy were noticed by the Muggle international media and were on the Muggle news. This was excused by the minister at the time, however, who said that they had the inalienable right to party, though some people like Barty Crouch Sr. claimed that the celebrating got out of hand and became childish and ridiculous. There was a lot of aftermath for this war, and though Voldemort was gone and the war was officially over, there was still a lot to do. Aurors, Order members, and Ministry officials searched at home and abroad for any sign of Voldemort, but found none. Although they eventually came to the conclusion that Voldemort had truly been defeated and was dead, many Death Eaters were still at large and were considered a threat. Peter Pettigrew attempted to go into hiding, as he feared being perceived as a traitor by the Death Eaters, because it was his information that caused Voldemort's downfall. Before he could do this, however, Pettigrew was confronted by Sirius Black on a street in London full of Muggles. In order to escape, he conjured a powerful curse that killed 12 Muggle bystanders, and he transformed into his animagus form of a rat, leaving behind a severed index finger as fake evidence against his opponent. This left Black universally perceived as the traitor to the Potters, as well as a mass murderer, for which he was quickly arrested and carted off to Azkaban for without a trial, courtesy of Barty Crouch Sr. From 1981 to about 1983, many more Death Eaters were rounded up, and though Snape was brought up, Dumbledore gave a personal testimony saying that Snape was on their side, and he gave Snape a job at Hogwarts. The remaining werewolves that were on Voldemort's side went underground, and the few remaining giants left Britain entirely and resettled in the last remaining giant colony in the mountains of Denmark. Some Death Eaters were able to walk free, like Igor Karkaroff, who gave people up for his freedom, as well as people like Lucius Malfoy, who claimed he was under the Imperius Curse and did not know what he was doing. Many innocent people really were released from the Imperius Curse following Voldemort's defeat, but Malfoy certainly was not one of them, as he did everything willingly. Others simply used their wealth, power, and influence to avoid punishment for their crimes, examples being Lucius once again, Crabbe, Goyle, and a few others. Many other Death Eaters were locked in Azkaban for their crimes, and by about 1984, whether they were free or in Azkaban, most Death Eaters thought that their master was gone for good, as it had now been a solid 3 years since his disappearance. However, there were a few who did not believe this, and in 1982, just a few months after Voldemort's defeat, Bellatrix Lestrange, Barty Crouch Jr., Crouch Sr.'s son, and Rodolphe Magic got himself out of the running for this scandal, especially after everyone saw the cold way he treated his own son, who he locked up, when many believed that Crouch Jr. was actually innocent. This is where the timeline for the First Wizarding War ends, and there was an era of peace in the Wizarding world. But as we know, the Second Wizarding War would pick back up about 14 years later in 1995. The First Wizarding War was a brutal one that brought death and chaos, and it affected many people's lives, especially the boy who was dubbed the Boy Who Lived, who, though he was famous, he was forced to grow up an orphan because of this war. On the bright side, this war of course shaped the man and hero that Harry would later become, and he would of course go on to be the chosen one who ended the Second Wizarding War. Thank you so much for watching, guys. You can follow me on social media to see more of my personal... Hello everybody, today we're going to do something a bit different, and after many years of friendship and talking to each other on a weekly basis, Dean, aka Harry Potter Folklore, is going to be a guest narrator for this video, and together we'll go back and forth and cover the topic of this video.
Thank you so much for having me on today, Morgan. I'm really excited to be part of this video, and I'm really honored to be able to feature on the channel today.
We decided to go all out and do a bigger video for this collab because it's been a long time coming, and we want this to be as epic as possible. So Dean, welcome to Movie Flame. It's amazing to have you on board for this video. Tell us what we'll be talking about.
So, for today's video, we're going to track all Voldemort's Horcruxes, who he killed to make them, what object he put it in, why he chose that object, where he hid it, and how that object was found and destroyed. Now, there will be major spoilers for the whole series, so there's your warning. So now that that's out of the way, let's get this video started.
Toward the end of Tom Riddle's time at Hogwarts, he began researching Horcruxes, and he found information in a book that explained to him exactly how to make it. Rowling, however, did not explain to the same applied to his Horcruxes. He picked objects that had significant value to him, and for most of his Horcruxes, he chose murders that were significant as well. So Dean, tell us about the first Horcrux he made.
The first object he plans to put a Horcrux in was his own journal, and this was probably the least significant object of the 7 Horcruxes he made. And this was actually for a good reason. This Horcrux was less of a protection and more of a weapon. That year, he had opened the Chamber of Secrets, as he was the rightful heir to Salazar Slytherin, one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, among Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, and Rowena Ravenclaw. Slytherin had built a chamber and placed a beast, more specifically a basilisk, that was ready to rid the school of all Muggleborns, and he planned for his rightful heir to fulfill his task, which is exactly what Tom did. Tom released the beast and ordered it to kill a girl named Myrtle. Because he was the one controlling the beast, speaking Parseltongue to the creature, it counted as him killing her. He used Myrtle's murder to split his soul and put that broken piece of the soul into the diary. This was his first Horcrux, and as I said, it was more of a weapon than for his protection, and he plans to use it to open the Chamber of Secrets, again many years after he left, because as of now, he was innocent and had framed another student named Rubeus Hagrid, meaning he couldn't open it again during his time at school. Now I'll let Morgan tell you about the second Horcrux.
The second Horcrux object was the Gaunt Ring. Voldemort spent a lot of time in the library researching his family heritage, and eventually he found his middle name, Marvolo, and he discovered his grandfather under the same name, who he was actually named after. During his summer holiday, he went to find Marvolo in the Gaunt house, but he only found his uncle named Morphin Gaunt, and Morphin was wearing the Gaunt Ring. This was the first time that Tom had ever seen him. Morphin told Voldemort about the Muggle boy named Tom Riddle, Voldemort's father, and after finding out that his father abandoned him and his mother, and that he currently lived in a mansion up the way, and stole the ring, a prize for the murder of his Muggle father. Voldemort would later go on to use his father's murder to make a second Horcrux, and he put it in the Gaunt Ring. Both the murder of his father and the Gaunt Ring had significant value to him, because his father's murder was revenge for making him grow up in an orphanage, and the ring had value because it was proof that Voldemort had good blood on his mother's side. Now I'll leave it to Dean to explain the third and fourth Horcruxes that Voldemort made.
The third and fourth Horcruxes were found together. After school, Voldemort got a job at Borgin and Burke's, and his job was to use his charm to make people part with their treasures so he could bring it to the shop and then sell it. One person who he visited very often was a woman named Hepzibah Smith. During one visit, she showed Voldemort two of her most prized possessions, Helga Hufflepuff's cup and Salazar Slytherin's locket. Each founder had an heirloom, and these were the heirlooms for Hufflepuff and Slytherin. These two objects had great value to Voldemort because they both reminded him of the place that he called home. And on top of that, he felt that Slytherin's locket was rightfully his, because not only was he the rightful heir to Slytherin, but Hepzibah also told him how Burke had gotten the locket from a pregnant, desperate woman who Voldemort knew to be his mother. After seeing these objects, Voldemort knew he was going to steal both of them, but he knew that now was not the time. He came back 2 days later, took the locket and the cup, killed Hepzibah, and used her death to make his third Horcrux, putting that broken piece of his soul into Hufflepuff's cup. This is actually interesting because Voldemort used the murder of Hufflepuff's descendant and put it in Hufflepuff's own heirloom. After that, Voldemort disappeared for a decade, and I'll let Morgan explain what he did during those 10 years.
After disappearing, Voldemort continued to find and make Horcruxes, but he also began to hide them. He realized that he had to hurry up during his time at Hogwarts. He found and charmed the Grey Lady, or Helena Ravenclaw, a ghost at Hogwarts who happened to be the daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw, another one of the Four Fast House Elf, Regulus being one of his Death Eaters, and he made his House Elf creature go through the security to make sure it worked. He then left the House Elf there to die, and we will come back to this plot point later. But now I'll let Dean explain what happened when Voldemort came out of his 10 years of hiding.
Voldemort came out of hiding to try and get a job at Hogwarts, the place that we've said a few times in this video was his true home. After Dumbledore refused him the job, however, Voldemort took a detour before leaving. He went to the Room of Requirements, a secret room in the castle that presented itself to you as whatever you needed it to be. What he needed was a place to hide something, and the room opened a place filled with mountains of discarded items that had been hidden over hundreds of years. He perched the item deep in the room, down one of the alleyways, and on top of an old statue of a warlock wearing a wig. After hiding 3 of the Horcruxes, he kept the diary and Hufflepuff's cup with him for a few more years, and he eventually decided to entrust